there, I am Matt Wilhelmi. I'm the owner of Strategic Voyages Business Consultants, and we're an outsourced CFO company providing CFO services to companies that maybe don't have a full-time CFO. And today I'm joined with Mark Repkin. This is our third episode in the series. Mark Repkin is the principal of Mark Repkin and Associates. They're a sales advisory firm concentrating on helping sales leaders close the gap between high performers and low performers. So Mark, thanks again for joining me today. You know, we've been talking about this company with a sales slump. They do have a sales team. They've been pretty consistent with their revenue over the last few years. And in our last segment, you kind of talked about maybe the owners, unfortunately, might need to look in the mirror. And so in this segment, what I wanted to kind of focus on is now that we've been through clarifying the problem, we've talked about maybe some things they need to avoid. Now it's time to kind of hear from the expert, from you, in maybe some different solutions they could try and maybe what your strategy would be in working with them. So thanks again for joining me, Mark.
Yeah, no, glad to be here. You know, I think in your practice as well, we share a concept of, let's diagnose before we solve. You know, it's kind of like going to the doctor. You don't want to walk in and say you have a headache and they hand you an aspirin. You want them to do some diagnostic tests. You want them to understand what the real issues are. And so with this particular case of the client, I would probably be concentrating on the sales leadership and understanding, where do we look? So I'm going to give you kind of 4 areas that I would use to look, and I'll tell you where I tend to focus my energies on. But the first thing is the ground, and I've described to you in the last session on what that culture is. It's a cultural thing. It's a belief system. It's the way that we operate here. It's all encompassing of the values that we have, and it's so important. It is the most important thing to do, is to define what our culture is going to be. And then think of it this way, Matt, of a pyramid. And this pyramid has 3 components to it. You have the base foundation of the pyramid, which is the structural issues. So at the base of the pyramid, you might deal with things such as, do we have processes? Do we have the tools? Do we have the definition of the roles and have the people in the right roles? Do we have systems that support the entire sales organization? So you get into stuff like CRM and all those kind of foundational things that are necessary. You also talk about consistency of messaging and making sure that all salespeople are carrying the same message and that we can flip those into good sales related questions. Then you have the middle section. That middle layer is really about skills and competencies, and there's usually a gap there. So this could be things like, do they actually have the skills necessary? Do the subject matter expertise, the knowledge, the capabilities, are they using it? Usually most companies I work with, Matt, they've invested in sales training, and people either aren't leveraging it, they're not using it, but this is kind of where sales training usually gets involved, but it's about skills and competencies. And then the top area is the soft skills and the team dynamics. And this is where that represents kind of the interpersonal skills, the teamwork, the motivation, the leadership abilities, and we're really trying to elevate team performance. And so in this case, based on what you've described to me, the culmination of everything we've talked about, it screams to me to be at the top, which is actually where I work. It's on that top zone. There's a leadership issue here, and through that, conversations would lead to a potential gaps in other areas of the pyramid. But we got to understand what is going on that's driving this mentality, and then it's only until I understand that I could even give a suggestion on how to fix it.
Yeah, that's great. So you talk about this pyramid with different levels, right? Yeah. And so I would imagine, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so clarify, obviously if I'm off here, but it would be really tough for you to start at the top if there are issues at the bottom, right?
100%.
And so in order for you to know kind of where in this pyramid to start working on it, there's probably some sort of assessment that you do, right?
Yeah, yeah. And just before I answer that assessment question, the way that the methodology came out of the pyramid was I borrowed it from Maslow, the hierarchy of needs. And so safety and security is at the bottom there. We can't get to self-actualization until we climb the pyramid. So it's the same kind of thinking, but you asked about an assessment. Absolutely. Um, Here's the thing: when you're advising and coaching sales performers and sales leaders, the first thing we have to is come up with some data points that they can understand. How do I perform, and as compared to who? As compared to other sales professionals or sales leaders. The example would be like at a football combine. The first thing you do with a new athlete coming into the NFL, if they're going to be a rookie, they don't ask them their philosophy of football. They don't ask them what they believe about this. They actually get them to run the 50-yard dash. They see how high they can jump. They talk about they see how much they can weight, the weight, the lifting, all these different assessment diagnostics, and it gives them a baseline. And we can use that baseline to show contrast and comparison to. And if you're going to ultimately bring that athlete onto your team, they're already filled up with a lot of ego and energy, and they think that they're the best of the best. But it's until they show them the data that says, listen, this is where you're uniquely brilliant, and we got to really focus in on those things. Here are things that are critical musts that you're weak on. And then it's through the data that they go, I guess you're right. And we can then get into conversations with that. But diagnostic instrumenting is critical to a starting point.
Yeah, so that kind of leads me into my next question, Mark, which pertains to maybe you specifically. But if somebody wanted to reach out and they wanted to hire you, maybe what's kind of that first step? Is there like do you spend a few minutes with them on the phone? Do they fill out a form on your website? Kind of how would they start working with you?
Yeah. Well, the majority of our clients come in from referrals from other clients, but some do come in through the website, and it always starts out the same way. We have what you might call a sales call, but we don't look at it that way. We look at it as your first free sales coaching. It's an advisory session because we're going to really get down to, we have a process that we follow. And at the end of the conversation, it's pretty clear on whether or not we can solve that, or it's another consulting organization. Because if it's really at the bottom of the pyramid and they're looking for systems, process, things like that, that's not where our area of specialty is. We know all to do that. We understand that, but then we would direct them elsewhere. It's at the top of the pyramid. We're dealing with the leaders. So the first thing is we go through the process of, I think I've told you in the past, I call it a wine tasting. Taste it before you buy the bottle. And if you like it, and you'll make a decision you want to work with myself or one of my other coaches that we have and advisors, that's that experience where we're going through. It spends about an hour, maybe 90 minutes. And at the end of it, it's quite clear whether it's a fit or not.
Well, that's really interesting. In this particular case study that we've been talking about with this sales slump, it does sound like they could use your help. But I guess my question, Mark, is, how do we maybe position your solution for them if, to maybe have you be as effective as possible? Because number one, I would never want to waste your time. And number two, there has to be some element, maybe that's done in your wine tasting, of almost you determining if they're actually ready to grow and actually interested in pursuing this higher level of achievement that you talked about. Because I would imagine some people aren't, and so what would it look like, Mark, for you to engage in a company like this? Would you come in and do a workshop? Is this, do you have like a curriculum you're teaching, or is it one-on-one coaching with their team? Kind of walk us through that process.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, we are either doing one-on-one advisory for our sales leaders, and or we put them into a sales leadership peer group. And in a one-on-one coaching or advisory is really, it's an hour type of a session. They're bringing their challenges and their issues to those sessions. We've already gone through, we know what we're working on, and they're telling us about, where they've gotten traction over the last month. And they're talking to us about what they're still challenged with it, and we advise them. Our job is not to come in and do the work for them. We're about empowering and enabling leaders to become their best. And I mentioned in, I think, our second segment about the idea of vulnerability. It's amazing what people will share with me and my colleagues because of the fact that we have 100% of their interest in mind. We're in their corner. We're simply just helping them become better and drive things. They're going to have to make the decisions. They know their business better than we know it. And we're trying to help them make a decision between option A and option B and get there quicker. And so when you talk about leaders, oftentimes it's the analysis by paralysis, and they just need someone to go like, what would you do? And we can help them get the answers quicker. And but yeah, I'm not coming in and doing the work. I'm coming in and advising the leaders and potentially some high performing salespeople to help them maximize their performance out in the real world.
Okay. So if we get back to kind of the original case study, and you meet with the owners, and maybe you decide, or they decide, y'all together decide that maybe, just maybe, the owner's not the best sales leader. Have you worked with a company where that's been the case, and you somehow, in your way of advising, kind of recommend that maybe they should fire themselves from that sales leader role?
Yeah, 100. Yes, all the time. As a matter of fact, one of my clients, and she's in New Mexico, and when she hired me originally, she questioned herself whether or not she was the right sales leader. And it started off with, I don't actually even love sales. In her case, it was kind of unique because she was the business owner, but she was really more operationally bent. And so we put a plan in place, and over the course of a year one was all about her optimizing and understanding what it really means to run the sales organization the right way. And at the end of that year, she had a totally different perspective on sales management and what it was taking. And she built a system that was rich and exciting for year two, which is when we found her replacement. And we went out there, and I helped her in the sourcing, the attracting, the sourcing, the recruiting, and eventually in the interviewing of the candidates that we had. We picked somebody, and now I coach that individual. And so what's happening is that now she's got sales leadership, and she has now moved herself more into a general manager role, and she's working on the business, and she worked herself out of a job. But it was through design. It was based upon what she really wanted for the business, not just what the business needed, but really, what did she want? She's like, I didn't want to do this job.
That's great. So, it brings a certain phrase to mind that I'll tell you in just a second. I was actually, Mark, I've got a really an interesting relationship with my daughter. She's 9. She's in 4th grade. And I like to ask her about her day, like a lot of parents do with their kids. How was your day? And, did you learn anything at school? And she's good for usually like 30-ish seconds of feedback. But recently, Mark, she started to ask me questions. Dad, how was your day at work? What did you do? And at first I was like, oh, I sent some emails, I was in some meetings. She's like, Dad, that sounds really boring. I'm like, well, okay. I do a little bit more than that. But anyway, the other day she was like, Dad, how was work? What did you do? And I thought maybe I'm going to try something a little different. And so I actually explained the concept that you just explained, which is, and to a 4th grader, it's a little different. But I said, I had to try and teach somebody that maybe they weren't the best at that job, and things would actually improve if they took themselves out of that role. And she's like, wow, that's really interesting. What do you call that? I'm like, what? I call it addition through subtraction. She's like, I don't get it. So, she's in 4th grade, but that's what you're talking about. You're talking about getting leaders to understand that they're the ones holding themselves back sometimes, and they can actually do a lot more by taking themselves out. That's an amazing concept.
Yeah, I think I think it's all over the place. I mean, if you look at time management principles, what do you find? It's not about addition. It's about removing things that you shouldn't be doing, delegating things that should be delegated, focusing on your areas of brilliance, and so yeah, subtraction by addition, or addition by subtraction. Yeah, love it.
Yeah. So Thanks so much for spending some time with me, Mark. Was there anything else that you felt like, would be a recommendation for this particular case study?
Oh my. Yeah, I think it's got to start somewhere, Matt. And I think that this business owner who's in his, he's in retirement age, he's holding on to something in the business. And the question is that what got him there to take the company to this level isn't what's going to take it to the next generation. And in all reality, he's not going to be able to see it in 30 years. So does he want to build a legacy? And if so, what does that look like? And really getting to his why about what's going on and help him get to the point of, let's get into some of these issues, because some of the things he's been resisting is him. In other words, it's his motivations, it's his fears, his concerns, and there's usually are met with the word "but." Good idea, Matt, but. And so he's got to get to the point of really looking at the bigger picture. So I'd say let's do what's strategically right for the long term, not worry just about the short term. Get the end in mind. Look at what the future looks like, what he wants to paint that as, and then start working backwards to find solutions that will get him there. But I would suspect that he doesn't have a very clear vision of what this company looks like in 5 years. I would guess that's where I would start.
And so that's one of the things that you would potentially do, right? Working with him, you'd maybe clarify that vision.
Yeah, I would talk him through that and help him kind of work through and hear himself talk, and and get to that point where we could say, okay, based upon what you said, he's going to solve the solution. I'm not going to tell him what to do. I'm going to help him come to these answers and come to the realizations of whether or not we can get traction with that, or that's just continue to get friction, and then embrace the change that's necessary to drive performance.
I love that. That's great. Well, Mark, thank you again so much for your time. Again, my name is Matt Wilhelmi, owner of Strategic Voyages Business Consultants. We're an outsourced CFO firm providing CFO services to companies without a full-time CFO. And I'm joined by Mark Repkin, principal of Mark Repkin and Associates, a sales advisory firm concentrating on helping sales leaders close the gap between their high performers and the low performers. Mark, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.